and limit our options. So when we are feeling positive, we tend to be open to what life hands us or the experiences that we're having around us. When we tend to experience unpleasant emotions, we tend to disengage from the world. And that basically affects three components of our lives. The first is our decision making, and emotions really influence the way we make decisions. For example, when you know someone is in a bad mood, you obviously make a decision not to approach them at that particular time. And when you know they're in a good mood, then maybe you feel that possibly if it's your boss who's in a good mood and you want to ask them something, you know that you're more likely to get a positive answer. So they affect even the influence the way that we decide. They influence our behavior. They influence how we express ourselves, the facial expressions we have, the body language that we use. And they are fundamental to how we connect with people and collaborate. In fact, in the power of authentic conversations, and even when leaders are communicating to others, what they're trying to touch on is the emotion. They're trying to evoke a certain emotion that brings you to where they want you to be, that inspiring emotion to make you want to act. And then the last is performance. When we feel in an organization that we are valued and people are taking care of our needs, we tend to perform better. When we are in a team that we tend to feel it's uncertain, we don't know what's happening tomorrow, maybe our bosses don't give us too much leeway to be innovative or empower us, we don't get enough trainings, we tend to feel stuffed. And so we might not be able to deliver to the very best of our ability. And these are just some of the statistics around organizations that really, really invest in emotional intelligence training as part of their regular trainings. And you can find this on the net. There's so much information about the benefits of fostering or growing the competencies of emotional intelligence in organizations. But today we're here to talk about the feedback problem. And the feedback problem where we know that feedback is a good thing. In fact, most organizations will say that feedback is a core value, and they will talk about how they want people to be able to say when things are wrong, to be able to escalate issues. But as much as we talk about feedback as a core value, very few of us are investing in building the psychological safety required to make it feedback truly sustainable and effective. Because feedback needs a space to thrive. Otherwise, if it doesn't have that psychological safety, even if I give feedback the first time and then I end up getting a response that doesn't make me feel safe, then I stop believing that the feedback is well-intentioned. So trust does not grow. And then I don't develop, because if I don't get honest feedback, then how will I develop as a person, as a contributor to the organization's goals? And then what happens last is silence, and silence replaces honest dialogue. And once this happens, then you have what we call cultural issues, and these are very difficult sometimes to address. So feedback in organizations, I would say, is routinely avoided or delayed until we have the formal review cycles, the appraisals. That's when we want to give feedback. Yet, feedback should be a continuous process and a continuous loop. Sometimes feedback is softened to the point it loses meaning. Today I was with a gentleman, he's a Briton, and he was saying, he was addressing some Americans, and this is a cultural issue. And before they said what they were saying, they said, I hope I'm not bothering you or not offending you if I just tell you, slightly. So they're trying to make up for the blunt thing that they're going to say at the end. So you soften it to the point that it loses meaning. You're not direct about what you really mean. And sometimes the opposite happens. It's weaponized as a tool for control rather than growth. And this then brings about the toxic cycle, where people then are scared of talking. They belong to cycles. They will only use feedback to even a score, and so on and so forth. And when that happens, people disengage, individuals and organizations stop growing. Why does feedback matter? One, it's about performance. When feedback is delivered with the necessary skill and consistency, it is one of the most powerful drivers for organization performance. In fact, research shows that teams with strong feedback, and sometimes they look like they're fighting, outperform those without across every industry, across every level. So it matters because it improves performance. People can only improve what they see. And there is no advantage to anyone when you speak about them behind their back, because you cannot be able to tell them what you want to, in all honesty, to their face. So again, it's a skill. So we have to learn to give constructive feedback that illuminates blind spots and provides clear direction for development. It accelerates learning. Remember a time when you were given feedback by someone and it was quite useful, but you kept saying, "So why did you tell me now? Why didn't you tell me earlier? I could have done one, two, three, four things had I known this at that time when this was happening." So when we are comfortable or we are cultivating a culture of feedback, we are giving it in real time. So we're shortening the gap between the lack of insight and action. And so we're learning. And in this world of AI and the world where we're talking about the future of work is so fast, it becomes an added advantage. It builds accountability. When we talk about the primary source of accountability in any team, a lot of people think that it is the leaders who have to hold you accountable for the results. But the primary source of accountability is actually our peers. And our peers can only hold us accountable if the leader has normalized feedback. If I feel that I can give feedback to anyone across the table without fear of reprisal or being ostracized, there is no emotional cost to me. Then immediately my colleague does something that is not to aligned towards what we are doing. What happens? I call them out because they know I'm calling them out because we're doing something together. It's not because I am trying to even a score or anything. And so when you can develop peer-to-peer accountability, which is a primary source of accountability, which makes accountability then a habit rather than a punitive exercise, you are able to develop real-time learning and real-time improvement and insights. And that strengthens trust and engagement, because people who receive honest feedback, they feel like they're being invested in, especially if that is bringing them to where they want to be. And we all know the cost of a poor culture, not just a poor feedback culture, but just a poor culture. High turnover, silent disengagement, conflict escalation, because we can't address issues right here. We're always taking them to the boss. So the leader has so many issues on their plate that have nothing to do with the strategic intention that they have. It has everything to do with putting out fires for everyone else, because, we can't solve it here between me and you. We don't know how. So we escalate it to the top, even small matters. Yeah. And the manager is always saying, "Why can't you solve these things yourself? Why are you bringing them to me? I'll never solve them for you." But we don't feel safe. Yeah. And so we have mediocre performance that is tolerated without being able to give feedback. One of the things that happens is you have this saying of, if you want something done well, do it yourself. And so therefore, each of you are not learning. And some of it, you're just tolerating the performance. And, words like "not my monkey, not my business," suddenly standards start being eroded, and we start accepting less than what is really required. So the cost of feedback is really tremendous. So why is feedback so difficult? The fundamental truth that most training programs overlook. I can come and I will teach you how to make a well-structured message. I'll even tell you you can use the sandwich method, deliver the good feedback first, and then deliver the difficult feedback second, and then maybe perhaps deliver make sure that you leave with a good word. So there are so many structures, but feedback is first emotional before it is rational. Every time someone gives you feedback, it will trigger you because it is challenging the way that you think about yourself. It activates fear and defensiveness. And remember, we said that when you experience unpleasant emotions, your first instinct is to narrow and limit your options. Narrow meaning, I don't like this that is happening in front of me, so I have to look for the most efficient way to get out of this situation. And that might mean I might have something better to do, I might ignore the person, or I might challenge them. There's the fight, the flight, or the freeze. freeze meaning I can hear you, but I'm not really behaving like I'm hearing you. And that is why EI becomes essential as a skill for giving and receiving feedback. Because without it, even the best frameworks and model, they fall flat. Now, why do we choose the Genos Emotional Intelligence framework to start with? Because Genos stands apart as a trait, not a trait, sorry, as how you show up, a behavior-based model, not a trait-based model. And this is very, very, very important because when we base it on how we show up, our behaviors, yeah, this means we are measuring the frequency of the behaviors that we call emotionally intelligent behaviors in the workplace. Then we're able to give practical evidence-based solutions for sustaining that particular behavior. So rather than asking how emotionally intelligent are you, the GEMOS framework asks how often do you demonstrate? And so our colleagues will say a question like, how often does Vicky make her colleagues feel appreciated? And the answers will range from, seldom, she never does it, from she does it, the way we'd expect her to she does it almost all the time. Yeah. And that's an emotionally intelligent behavior, making others feel appreciated. And so when you have it framed in a manner that is sustainable, then you find that it goes beyond or endures any single initiative or training event, because then we are learning in self-awareness to catch these behaviors when they happen so that we can be able to make better decisions with the behaviors that we are showing or showing up with. So there are 6 competencies when it comes to emotional intelligence, but today I will just talk about 4 that I think are really crucial when it comes to the culture of feedback. And the first one is self-awareness, which we will talk a bit more about in a short while. Understanding your emotions, triggers, and patterns, and then awareness of others, reading and responding to the emotions of the others around you. We'll talk about the power of authentic conversations, which for us at Genos means communicating with honesty, with courage, and with care. And of course, self management, which is about regulating emotions rather than reacting. So let's start from the very beginning, which is self awareness. Self awareness is really the foundation in which all other competencies are built on. In fact, if you look at any framework that talks about emotional intelligence, the first place they always start is self awareness. And it just basically means developing a clear and an honest understanding of your own emotional triggers. So, topics, situations, or dynamics that cause you to become reactive, defensive, or even avoidance. Self awareness is important because it makes you ask or recognize what are your blind spots? What are the gaps between how you think and then how you show up? And how are others actually experiencing you? So people with a strong sense of self-awareness, they regularly seek out this information and they sit with the discomfort that it brings. They're always asking, so how did I deliver that? Could I have done it better? And they're always closing that gap between the way I perceive myself and the way that other people perceive me. Because the closer that gap is, the way that others perceive us and the way that we perceive ourselves, the more self-aware we really are. And then finally, it means monitoring our impact in real time. So during feedback conversations, are you coming across just by who you are, or even by the tone of your voice as supportive, or are you coming across as threatening? Are you creating an open environment, or are you creating a closed one? Are you being curious about the conversation, or are you presenting judgment without even being aware? So, without this awareness of how we bring ourselves to feedback conversations, even the best of intentions can produce harmful outcomes. So, remember that people do not read our intentions, they see our behavior. And so when people experience us as self-aware, they experience us as present to what we are saying, to who we are. And therefore they can see that we understand the impact that we have or the emotions our emotions have on the current state. When we are not self-aware, we really appear disconnected. For example, I'm trying to tell someone, please tell me what is wrong, but the tone of my voice is harsh and I cannot understand why you're not giving me back that feedback, right? So in the spirit of feedback, I find you disconnected from the question that you're asking me and the way that you're behaving. If you are asking me, like the way our mothers used to ask us, what did you do? Who are you with? The very tone, you're so scared. So you're asking, do you really want feedback, or are you admonishing me? Are you arguing with, are you, punishing me? So the question itself and the manner with which it's asked are not congruent. They're very disconnected. So those are the questions you ask yourself. How connected am I to what I am actually doing and the impact that I'm having? So self-awareness in practice looks like this: inviting feedback on yourself, asking your teams, your peers, your managers for honest input on how you deliver feedback and making it a practice, yeah, not a one-time thing. And this actually requires a lot of intellectual humility, but after some time, it becomes normal. Everything you put into practice, you do well. And then second is then catching yourself when you're being defensive. One of the things I had to teach myself when I started noticing I'm being defensive is to ask questions, to be curious about the feedback that I was being given rather than start explaining myself. So when I start using the word because, that's a defensive word, or but, that's a defensive word, or what do you mean, no, what do you mean is a curious word, but look at the first words that come out of your mouth when you're being given feedback. Are they words that are defensive, or are they words that signal curiosity? And then always creating that gap before you respond to any feedback. Yeah. And this allows you then to be able to recalibrate internally and check your emotional reaction to ensure that you have a thoughtful response. And then last but not least, checking how you're modeling vulnerability. Yeah. When leaders of give feedback that they're working on something, it gives everyone else the ability to be imperfect and to start growing. So without this information, what we find is that you have to be deliberate and you have to put these four practical behaviors into action immediately for your feedback to start growing. The next one that I'm going to talk about is awareness of others. And awareness of others is basically being able to understand and read emotional cues accurately, to recognize discomfort or resistance. So when someone has shut down, they become anxious, they're no longer truly listening. So you have to be able to read those cues and you're giving feedback. So to know, is my feedback really landing, or has someone possibly moved on to something else? So responding appropriately, adjusting your approach based on what you observe, not just pushing through your agenda. Taking a pause and saying, okay, fine, I can sense that I mean you're not speaking, or I can sense that this has made you discomfortable. Would you care to elaborate? Signal to the other person that you've actually seen them, because feedback is not a one size fits all situation. The most effective feedback givers are those who can read the room, they can sense where the person is at emotionally, and their delivery is in real time to maximize receptivity. So, communication is a two-way process, and you, the person communicating, have to ensure that you're also communicating effectively and your message is being heard and listened to. So it means that you have to recalibrate your approach to each individual every single time that you're speaking to them. It means you have to watch your tone, the pace of the way you deliver. Another way is also to ask before telling. So one of the questions I like asking is, um, when I want to give feedback is, what were we hoping to achieve? How do you think it went? So we've started with something, and then you'll find that people actually can give feedback that is quite accurate about themselves. And then now you share your perspective, and that means you have given the person autonomy over this session that you're having. So this is not just a performance appraisal, it's a conversation. And then check for understanding. Always ask, what did you mean by that? Or what do you think this means? Or when I say, it says here that you did not fully accomplish the goal. What was the goal? What did you think that meant? Or, clarifying questions. And then create safety before correction. Ensure that, and then it doesn't mean sitting there and, talking kumbaya, making laughing fast. It means, first and foremost, setting the intention of why we are here, reaffirming that
this process is actually meant to help you, anchoring it on purpose and setting the intention that this is supposed to go well because this is actually an area of growth for the person that you're giving feedback. So what's the third thing about building feedback and really good feedback in culture? It's about having authentic conversations. And authentic conversations are really at the heart of a feedback culture because it represents the ability to engage in open and honest communication. If communication cannot be open and honest, then it does not address the very issues that are asking us to give feedback so that we can improve our performance, which is basically what we're always targeting. We want to improve on how we do things so we can push productivity, so we can push business goals, and we can achieve our strategic goals of the year. That's what we are chasing. And so such conversations have to be open and they have to be honest, even when the topic is uncomfortable or the stakes feel very high, but they have to be delivered with finesse. So this competency requires that we have conversations and we align them to shared goals, right? So it's never about personal grievances or power plays. It is what is best for this person or for the team. So a feedback session should start with, and if it's an appraisal, what did we set out to achieve? That was the thing, not starting to attack their person. What did we set out to achieve as a team? Where are we now? What didn't work out? What worked out? How did you bring yourself to this conversation? If you look at what you did, where would you rate yourself? Do you think you brought your very best self? What about this time and the other time? What could you do differently? A lot of curiosity. And then the last thing is about that authentic conversations. They demand courage to address issues directly and not to, pussyfoot around them, not aggressively and not passively, but with honest clarity. That means you must be prepared for a feedback session. You cannot just show up from one meeting and check into a feedback session and say, so how are we doing? But hey, I want to talk to you about this thing. You can't do that. That is actually a no. And it is imperative, it is actually very, very important that you prepare yourself always if you're going to have these kind of conversations with anyone, whether it's your peer, whether it's your boss, whether it's the person that you're managing. So this will set you apart from a good feedback session or just a mediocre feedback session. So what are the qualities of good, authentic conversations? They are specific and behavior based, not a person based. So they look at observable behaviors. Yeah. They are timely and respectful. They don't happen years later. You remember that time, that's not great feedback. So they're respectful in that you choose a time and a place where the person, it doesn't look like a reprimand, it looks like a growth opportunity. They invite dialogue. So even as I'm saying, I noticed that you interrupted me too many times at yesterday's meeting rather than you're not a good listener. I'm like, what? I mean, what was happening? And I'll be like, oh, yesterday I just felt like then we're having a conversation. Then I say, okay, fine, I see your intention, but it felt to me like you were second guessing everything that I was saying. And then the other person says, that was not really my intention, but I can see how you could have felt, how you could have seen it that way. So you see, you're having a two-way dialogue, and I'm not just grounding you and telling you stuff. And because if you do not have the two-way dialogue, then a person feels like they were told and were not involved. So you remove shared outcomes as a possibility for that feedback session, and they're grounded on shared outcomes. As I said, so when the person understands the why are we here? What's the purpose? You know that we're an organization that is highly driven by compliance, and therefore we cannot afford to have even one slip when it comes to compliance. So, do you now see why I'm really, really hard on you when it comes to this and this and this? And the guy says, oh, yeah, it costs the organization this much money every time we don't do this and this. And in fact, then the only thing is, I'm trying my level best not to get it cut from your salary, but and so on and so forth. So we've taken it back to purpose. We've taken it to something substantial, not the person. You're always careless. You never bring yourself to the table. You're never able to do this thing. Why? You don't value. the team and you know we're always getting beaten because of this compliance thing, ground it back to the why. And those are the four things I would share about good, respectful, authentic conversations during feedback. And then the last one is self-management. Self-management for me is usually the most important competency whenever I talk about emotional intelligence after self-awareness. Because without self-management, it is difficult to really do anything. If you don't manage well, it's difficult to be aware of others. It's difficult to catch yourself being defensive. In fact, they say that when you're so stressed, what you do is you react. You react to everything. Imagine when you don't have money, you react. You pay bill after bill after bill after bill. It's difficult to plan long term and respond to life. So it's a competency that holds everything together. And when you are balanced and you are emotionally, you have the emotional bandwidth, you can manage difficult emotions or disruptive emotions. You can put that pause between frustration, between anger, between when someone has given you feedback in a manner that really hurt, so that you then don't retort, say something back that then, railroads the whole conversation. You can be the bigger person and bring back that conversation to the place where it's meant to be. So leaders with strong self-management, they remain calm in these difficult situations sometimes, and they remain calm under pressure because self-management allows you to choose response over impulse. And the more that you self-manage, the wider that space, which you call the reaction response space, the space that allows you to pause before you react to a very strong emotion. And the more that you can intentionally, emotionally regulate. So, at the core of self-management is about choosing responses. So, even if I come to you, I may not be very good at feedback. I'm able to take you back and tell you, hang on, wait a minute. I need to understand. What are you really telling me? Yeah. You are so late. You've been coming later. I've been hearing that you've been saying, hold on, hold on, hold on. Excuse me for 1 minute. Just pause. Eh, Start the story again. That's a better reaction than me also, starting to talk over the person again because I felt triggered. And so self-management is a muscle that we practice, but when we self-manage, we're able to pause before responding. We're able to reframe criticism constructively. We're able to think, what can I learn here? What is this person really trying to tell me? We're able to remain curious. We're able to ask clarifying questions, and then we're able to separate intent from impact. We're able to understand that this person must be coming from this particular intention. And even if they've used the wrong words, then the effect of the words they have on me might not be very pleasant. Then I need to be curious enough to ask clarifying questions that take me back to where they wanted me to be. So integrating all these four competencies, cultivating self-awareness, cultivating awareness of others, building the skill of having authentic conversations, and then always ensuring that you're self-managing. It means that now, aided with the feedback that you've been given or you've learned about whichever framework that was about how to give honest and genuine feedback, whichever school of thought you have, it means that you will almost always be able to to deliver that now with finesse, to do it better each and every single time, to grow in the art of giving feedback. Because as we've seen, the first place where we sabotage feedback is really from our emotions, because those little captains of the heart, they rule us in very, very many ways. So when we combine deep self-awareness with genuine awareness of others, we bring an understanding that creates authentic conversations. And in those authentic conversations, we learn to regulate our emotions through self-management to create conditions for a feedback culture that is resilient, yeah, that is human-centered, and now that is sustainable, right? So, what are the four things I would leave you with, even as we close? Reflection questions before getting feedback. What am I feeling? What emotion have I brought to this session? Yeah. Pause and walk through these four questions. What are you feeling? Quick check. What emotions am I carrying to this particular feedback session? And then secondly, what might the other person be feeling? And I'll give an example here. I have a feedback session because something has gone wrong. And I'm not sure, but I think my colleague is was handling it. So what am I feeling? I'm feeling a bit frustrated. I'm feeling a bit, I perceive there was a bit of negligence. I'm getting a bit angry. And maybe there was a bit of an altercation somewhere. So I'm also a bit scared. But then ask myself what might be the other person feeling. They've let down the team, so they're probably feeling very frustrated with themselves. They're feeling like they've let down others. They might be feeling overwhelmed, right? So how can I then create a safety for us to really have an open conversation? And then the third thing is, what is the truth that needs to be said? What do we need to tackle at this particular conversation? So we are clear. So you're going into that conversation clear-headed. You're not going to wing it, and talk about the sun, the moon. Or sometimes you go in there and you start the conversation, wewe, unajua vile umefanya, So identify the core message that you need to deliver so that you can be calm, you can be direct, and you can frame it with care, and you can connect it back to the shared goals that I talked about, to the company goals. And then last but not least, how do I regulate myself from saying, when saying it? Some conversations you're already shaking before you get there. Maybe your hands are shaking. Maybe the minute you open your mouth, your voice starts to shake. So different conversations will require you to manage yourself differently. So what will be your approach in terms of staying composed? I remember once I went to a meeting, a heated meeting in my business, and that was, of course, the subject. But I wanted something done, and I knew that all these people around me, it was going to be a very intense conversation. And I actually called my coach and I told her, this is going to be a really difficult conversation. What can I do? And she says, look for a phrase, yeah, that you can repeat that brings you back when the conversation becomes heated. So I walked in there acknowledging that I was very afraid. I did not know how the conversation was going to turn out, feeling a little bit overwhelmed, but understanding that the people in that room were a bit angry, defensive. And but I knew that they wanted the best possible outcome out of that conversation so that we could have a way forward with what we're going. What were we tackling? Performance issues. So having a particular phrase that I went back to. And the particular phrase for me was, I really hear what you guys are saying. But remember, the issue here is one, two, three, because we kept going off track and bringing things from 1999 to, wherever, and those would derail the conversation. So having an anchor statement that brought us back to why we were really there and what we were doing really helped me calm down. And by the time we were maybe 5, 10 minutes in, I was calm. And whenever the heat would raise, bring it back down. So what will be your approach in staying composed while the conversation continues? How will you manage your own reactivity? And on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you rate that particular conversation? So embedding feedback, a culture of feedback organizationally. Of course, I'm going to tell you train and measure for EI. It is essential that you equip people with emotional intelligence. When you read the book by Amy Edmondson about psychological safety, she says, is it she or I think it is how it says psychological safety is impossible without the behaviors that come with emotional intelligence. So when you really invest in EI in this era where we talk about collaboration, critical thinking, cohesive teams, persuasion, those are the real skills of the future. Soft skills. You cannot then afford not to focus on training people and empowering them in the skills around emotional intelligence. The second thing is, what are you rewarding? So, how do you reward constructive behavior and celebrate people with honest but respectful feedback? How do you normalize upward feedback? How do you create a safe, structured channel for employees, not through mtandao and those boxes where we give feedback where no one knows who we are, but how does it flow back up? I've been in cultures where, someone speaks to the boss, and I'm like, what? I am not sure I would be able to take that. But of course, there are different levels for everyone, but they have normalized feedback up. And once you normalize feedback up, then feedback across will also come naturally. And then replace performance annual reviews with regular ongoing performance conversations, light conversations. And in fact, sometimes normalize check-ins. There's a little checklist we have that helps us have a conversation one to one with our peers and even with our bosses that is not hinged on performance. It talks about my work. Am I feeling supported? Do I feel like I know my KPIs well enough? Do I feel like my team supports me and I support them? Do I feel like the organization is supporting me and I support it? So all those are tools that you can have and that you can then be able to start working on slowly by slowly to build a feedback culture that is sustainable. So, final reflection. I invite you to ask yourself, where does feedback break down where you are? What are the specific moments, relationships, or systems where feedback stalls, it gets diluted, or disappears completely? That's where the opportunity lies. And then looking at the competencies I just shared, which competency is the weakest for you and for your team? What's that development area? Is it self-management? We can't regulate ourselves. When it gets to a certain level, we lose it, right? Too often. You can lose it once in a while, but when you lose it a lot of the times, it's too often. Then what one behavior, talked about many, what one behavior today that I've talked about, one concrete small behavior, can you commit to practicing today? Because culture changes one conversation at a time. And if you choose to invest in being a person that teaches in the organization about emotional intelligence, then you might want to consider coming onto our course, which is starting on the 16th of March, and become an emotional intelligence certified practitioner and coach. And if you're working in any organization, you can then be able to deliver this content at your place of work. Or if you are a consultant, you can help organizations start having this particular skill and start supporting them in developing competencies that or skills that actually support feedback and actually support culture that are sustainable, that are more humane, that are then practicing the skills that we're all talking about now as the main futures that matter in the future of work. And with that, I must say, I thank you for your time. It's been about 40 minutes where I've shared with you, about 35 minutes actually, where I've shared with you how EI and in particular the Genos competencies can support us when we put in our core values that feedback is one of the things that we value and respect, how we can make that more sustainable in the areas that we are working in. So with that, I invite any questions that you might have. You can put them on the chat. I can see we still have 10 more minutes before this conversation is over. As I always say, I like keeping all these conversations to an hour so that, once you are done with a particular session like today, you can then be able to move on to the next thing that you are doing. So please feel free, connect with us. We have shared the links for this particular certification, and I hope that it has been of use to you as well. I see there are some two questions which I'll take very quickly. We have Farah asking, how can I suggest 180 or 360-degree assessments to a client who's not familiar with the culture of feedback? If you find a client who's not very, very, very familiar with the culture of feedback, what I would say is start them with a self-assessment. Just give them the self-assessment first and let them go through the 6 competencies as they were. And they'll start seeing the 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 usefulness of the 6 competencies. And by the way, the other ones will start wondering, oh, if I can say this about myself, then maybe I need other people to tell me how I show up, maybe about making others feel appreciated. I rated myself as really, really high. But I'm like, okay, do I really do that? And that's how I would start. That's how we started in organizations where they say, here feedback is not very developed. And then for Miriam Karanja, thank you very much. Great reminders on the core of emotional intelligence and the invitation to commit to making a shift and building psychological safety within our own organizations. Thank you so much, Marianne. Kennedy, we shall reach out to you, and yes, we shall give you the presentation. We all share our presentations at the end of, with the mailing list that we get. So this will be shared to you in
format, and there will be a recording of what we talked about. So thank you so much. I don't think there are any other questions. Maybe I can go back to the certification details. That's what we have there. And the next cohort is starting on the 16th of March. If you reach out to us, we are definitely going to enroll you in the next course that is happening from March. If there are no other questions, maybe you can leave for me on the chat as you sign out. What is the one thing, one takeaway that you have had out of this session? What's that one thing, one takeaway that you have had out of this session? And then you can sign out and I can leave you to enjoy your evening. We still have 7 minutes. I think today I've been very efficient in my delivery. What's the one thing, if you're still on the call? What's that one thing? Let me see. Or have I lost everyone? Can see. Thank you, Marianne. My takeaway and reflection in my section or business division is on the need to cultivate more self-awareness. Thank you, Marianne. Let me see if there are other comments before. Authentic conversations. Thank you very much, Felicia. Felicia, how are you doing? And then we have Linda. To run a meeting efficiently. Secondly, IQ is very important. Oh, I didn't know that you keep time. Thank you very much. And that IQ is very important, but needs to be a deliberate. It needs to be a deliberate work. I think you mean consistency. Yes, being able to understand your environment, self-awareness, and others too. To be intentional in improving my self-awareness, how I show up, and to build my EQ. And then how teams can work together to remain invigorated. And my personal favorite, yes, self-management. Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. I will now stop sharing. And I can see Caroline says, I need to work on creating psychological safety on matters feedback. uh, very direct and doesn't work for some of my team members. Very, very true. I also have that particular problem. I'm very direct. So sometimes I always have to be aware that the tone of my voice is not inviting feedback. And so when I start asking people, why aren't you sharing? I realize even the way that I'm asking them is not really the easiest. And so the way we bring ourselves, the impact we have on that space is really up to us, especially if you're the leader or the manager. Remember, everyone is looking up to you. You're the impact. You're the impact on everyone who's looking up to you. And so if you're abrasive and brash and aggressive, you might call it assertive, but really what it is that that you're creating an environment where people are second guessing when is the best time to give you feedback. Is today a good? Is Vicky today the best? So if there's something, if it's burning fire, and it has happened to me a few times, people won't tell you immediately. And so sometimes you have to be aware of the contributory part that you play in that particular element. So I can see we have self-awareness is very critical in managing teams. Authenticity with EI is important. I've also learned how social intelligence dovetails with EI. And then also Mohammed says embedding feedback culture organizationally. That was great. As a HR consultant, I believe culture is a strategy for breakfast. Of course, thank you so much for sharing. So thank you, everyone. Allow me to wish you a lovely, lovely evening. Please do reach out to us and we will give you further details of the certification. And if you want us to run an emotional intelligence training in your organization, also reach out to us and we shall do exactly that. Asanteni sana, all the way from TZ to Malawi as well. Natakia kila laheri. God bless you and see you at the next session. Bye.